What's up, everybody? Hope you all are doing great. Today's video is going to be about this lovely 10 scale Nitro drift build. I think I've been watching too much Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift because I really wanted to build a proper functioning Nitro build that's a drift car that's not a headache to drive, and this thing turned out absolutely fantastic. I just really enjoy driving this thing so much, and it behaves truly like a proper realistic drift car, with the exception being all-wheel drive. But the all-wheel drive on this is not as you think. It's actually, I think, 70-30, if I'm not mistaken, because the rear wheels spin way more than the front wheels. Let me put it on a stand and give you a better, look into this thing. All right, now that the car is on a stand, we can see it a bit more clearly. And just look into the details, forget the mirrors and the wing and everything like that. But even the front vents on this car, it is vented, and it's got these nice little aluminum tow hooks. The wheels are perfectly offset to sit flush with the edge. And as always, we have a beautiful exhaust system here. This is the highlight really on these cars when they drive, and this being a drift build, Nitro for me is always the way to go. I love the electric drift builds. They're just so smooth and a bit more controllable than the Nitro, but if you really dial these things in perfectly, you can get them to drive just as good as electric. Obviously, the power band delivery is very different with Nitro. Yeah, but we'll look here into the exhaust. It's also, this exhaust for this car is exactly replicated specifically for this car. This body is a rare Yokomo drift body, and it's just fantastic. And looking at the details, even the little NOS bottle that's inside, and obviously this one is not functional being a 10th scale. You can, and we'll talk about that on another video which I have coming soon with regards to nitrous and RC cars, because I've been using nitrous on RC cars probably since 2011. Yes, for those that don't know, you can use nitrous on RC cars. You have different gauges and shots for different scales, like 110, 1/8, 1/5 scale. And it's mainly about the size of the engine, not necessarily the scale of the car. But yeah, anyways, back to this build. Let's just take off the body. Beautiful body. I love Yokomo drift bodies. They really do make them the best looking, and having extra detail like the wipers and things that you can add to it, you can really make these bodies look like very realistic, let's say. So back here, this is another chassis, which is a Tamiya TG10 Mach 1, kind of similar to the Evo that we did last time, but on this one it's a little bit different. It's tuned more so for drift. It's got a few different bells and whistles on it. It's got the drift setup suspension. It's got the additional TG10 stabilizers, if you can see them here. These things were really hard to find and super rare and ridiculously priced. Are they worth it to pay the money that people are asking on eBay? I don't know, but they do help. Honestly, they do help. Another thing that's pretty interesting here is the 2-speed gearbox which we installed. So it's pretty rare for you to see a drift car that's set up to be a 2-speed. Most people do the opposite. Most people do a downgrade where they go from 2-speed to 1-speed, or when you buy these drift cars like the old HPI RS4 models, if you wanted a touring car, it came with 2-speed. If you wanted a drift build or a drift RTR, it came with a single speed, mainly because it is easier to control. Because once you're sliding and that second gear kicks in sometimes, if you're not used to driving a Nitro model and you're not prepared on how to handle the throttle, the second gear will cause you to either spin out or crash, or it just will over rev the engine and it'll overheat. And with me, I have to not be too cautious on how I drive these cars, because I do vent the bodies. I just don't like making a big hole here in the windscreen. So what I try to do is, like I said in the beginning, I try to vent out the actual real vents and to give it just some little bit of cooling, and it's never failed me. I would always, after running for a while, after running 3 tanks non-stop, I would stop immediately and put a temperature gun on the engine, and they would always be running optimal. Also, the way I drive maybe makes a difference. If I'm gonna just be revving it the whole time, maybe they can overheat, but usually with bodies, I tend to vent them enough to give the engine a bit more cooling. Also, one thing is that when you're drifting with these models, with this scale as well, you don't really want to be on the, well, it's not a rev limiter, but you don't want to really be revving the engine to the red line all the time, because one, it's not the best for handling the car. You're just going to keep doing circles. And two, you're going to overheat the engine. So yeah, another thing I had to do here, I had to adjust the hubs. So we had to put the TRF hex hubs on the back to hold the wheel. Another thing I had to do is, as you can see, the front diff here, front differential, is not locked. So the front diff is fine. The rear differential, being a drift build, is locked. So I locked it. So the both wheels will move in the same direction at the same time. So yeah, and it's a pretty good, you know, platform, the TG10. I like it. You can use any platform really to make a drift build, but I would say you have to have some experience with RC cars for a while before you decide to do one with Nitro, because Nitro can be very finicky, but if you build it correctly, it will be perfect, and it will give you, you know, just as little of a headache as electric, if not less, because sometimes when you're driving the electric, the battery runs out. If you don't have a spare battery or something, you know, you have to call it a day. With this one, just refuel and keep going. You can drive this endlessly. The only battery you have to worry about is the receiver battery over here. But yeah, also another thing I would say is on these kits, I don't use the standard AA batteries. I like to use lithium receiver batteries. So 1000, 2000 mAh, something like that. Anything that fits really, because it makes the servos respond way better. It makes the throttle response way better. And yeah, that's it, you know, for the drift build. With regards to the exhaust, you know, this is all custom here. Sorry, it's not the prettiest, because if I was gonna spend all the time on just one build for months and months, and I can probably fabricate a proper aluminum exhaust, or, you know, metal exhaust, mainly aluminum exhaust pipe to go all the way here. But I noticed something with aluminum exhaust pipes. Sometimes when you do too much fabrication, they can crack, because I've done that before. So I like sometimes the heat resistant silicone, and I like using aluminum tips. I like using metal, but I like using silicone conjunctions. Also, it makes it a ton easier when you actually need to take apart the car, or take apart only the rear. You can disassemble it piece by piece. When you fabricate something and you weld it as one piece, once you start to take things apart to fix it, it becomes a nightmare. It becomes a literal nightmare. So yeah, that's something that I noticed along the way. But yeah, it's just lovely the way it works. Again, when making rear exhausts or things like that, I wouldn't just go ahead and do that. I would drive the car. And because the minute you put something here, the minute you add any type of restriction here, you're going to have to retune the engine. The engine is not just going to function the same way as without having all this in the back here. So maybe if it just had this without this part here, then yes, you can probably tune it the way it comes from factory and the standard settings. But you will have to mess with it, and it takes time to learn how the Nitro engine works, depending on what kind of exhaust routing you have, because sometimes you don't go one, you go two routings, sometimes you go three. So it's a process, and it's just kind of like a trial and error thing. So the more you kind of drive Nitro RC cars, and the more you're familiar with Nitro RC cars, the more likely you will get this right. But if, let's say, you try to do this and you don't have that experience, I guarantee you're going to have either a rich or lean setting, but it will change. It's not like it's going to be rich when you give it gas, and then at the top range it's going to be too lean, and when that happens the car kind of revs on its own. So it's very easy to crash and damage this thing, because it's kind of like having a throttle, you know, stuck. And yeah, that's not really a throttle stuck issue, it's just a mixture issue. And when it's too lean, it kind of gives that impression that you're on the gas when you're really not. Yeah, it's just a lovely build. I just want to put the body on it one last time before we go out. And again, before I put the body on it, everything here has been redone. So you can buy these kits used, but you have to really, you can't just drive them out of the box. These are old kits. Their screws might be loose, and that's just the basics, you know, screws, things like that, bolts. But the other thing is the engine. Most likely it's going to be, you know, not taken care of. Gaskets haven't been changed. Exhaust is still bad. Carburetor is bad. Gaskets are probably leaking. Fuel hoses are bad. You've got to check the tank, make sure everything is good, make sure there's no cloggage there, because nitro oil residue can harden up. I've seen nitro oil harden up. You'd almost think it's plastic. So you have to make sure that you kind of have everything flowing smoothly from the tank. Another thing is that with these bodies, this Yokomo drift body, you can't just go ahead and install it the way it is like this. You have to modify the mounts, and you kind of have to do this like an in-house job, because they don't make specific mounts for the Yokomo bodies and the same length. You don't want to go in irregular places. The body won't sit well, so you kind of have to modify this as you go. Another thing you have to modify is the tank. The tank sits pretty high on this TG10, so what I do is I instead of making it sit at the top from here, I bring it down and I reverse the process. Instead of the screw going into the tank first, then into the chassis, I make it go into the plastic chassis, and then the frame or whatsoever, the deck, and then into the tank. So it drops the tank one level lower, which is perfectly enough to sit the body without any restriction. And that's what I care about. I just want it to fit perfectly. I don't want any wheel rubbing. I don't want anything like that. And this kind of makes it sit really beautiful. And the way it drives is just stunning. All right, so you can't really hear second gear shift properly, and that's because of the way I adjusted it. I adjusted it to be pretty smooth, so it gets into second gear without jerking the car too much. And for that, it doesn't shift too early, but doesn't shift too late. So mid-drift, when it changes gears, it's so smooth you don't even hear it, but it revs so much higher than the standard gearbox. So you know the second gear is engaged. But yeah, and also another thing which I really love, and I think I got perfectly right, which is very hard to do sometimes, is the suspension. It's not too soft and it's not too hard. It's perfect for this you know, for getting traction when I want it, but also unsettling the car when I need to get those nice smooth drifts. Because Nitro engines are not like electric engines when it comes to drifting and sliding around. The power delivery is very different. It's almost like comparing a 2-stroke versus a 4-stroke engine. These are more like the 2-stroke with the Nitros, and the electric are more, well, not even like 4 strokes. The power delivery is just so perfectly linear in the electric. But again, I don't prefer it because I love the scale realism. I love the fun, the detail. I mean, this is like, you know, if you've watched Formula Drift, if you watched the D1 events in Japan, if you watched Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, seeing this thing and the way it behaves and drives, it's spectacular. It gives you that, I don't know, it's a beautiful feeling. I know I always talk great about nitros and gasoline engines and things like that, but this one is just really another level. When you know how the real cars work and then you see these things on this scale drive, so similar, so cool, so realistic. It just, you can't help but smile every time you drive this thing, and it makes me want to drive RC cars more and more. I love electric RC cars, but I never get extremely excited to go out and, you know, just spend so much time and drive these things. But yeah, Nitro, phenomenal, fantastic, especially when they're done and they're modified and done and tuned correctly like this. It's just an absolute blast. So I'm not done yet. I already ran like 2.5 tanks. Probably gonna do 2.5, 3 more, and then head back to the workbench and check it out. But yeah, as you can see, when I drive, I make it a point to just have fun without damaging the body too much, because these things have gone up in price ridiculously. The Evo, I used to have an Evo which I bought a long time ago for like 80, 90 bucks. Now I looked at it, I wanted to buy one again, and it was like $500 from Japan. So, and that's just for the body without the kit. So the prices have become absolutely ridiculous on these things. So the more you take care of these things, the longer they'll last, and the more beautiful they'll look on the shelf or a display if you have one. So yeah, let's get to more driving and go from there. Alright guys, so that was it for the driving part. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and really I sure as hell enjoyed it, because I don't know, just driving these things makes me smile all the time. So yeah, beautiful build, turned out fantastic. I really love this thing. There she is, back safe and sound in the display case, and honestly looks great. Looks like I didn't even take this thing out, and honestly I drive the heck out of this thing, not just on the video, but I do drive all the RC cars that are on display. And yeah, despite the scuffs and the mishaps that I've had on the road, it's held up pretty good. And I'd say the only thing that's pretty much almost worn out is the tires, because I put a lot of, let's say, miles on these things. But anyways, I know a lot of people ask me if I, sell these things. And honestly, I do sometimes when I want to thin out my collection, but it's hard for many people to understand the price point of these cars. They range, they vary. There's a lot of different models and makes and all that stuff. But yeah, so it also takes a lot of time for me to build these things. It's not like I buy it ready and I do some baby modifications. It really takes time to get it running 100%, a lot of trial and error, a lot of aftermarket parts. Sometimes you buy parts that you don't need to use, so you end up just basically wasting money. So if I were to sell these, I would have to really price them at a fair price point for me, but also fair for someone who's buying them, because one, these are not kits that are, most of the kits that I have are not kits that are just readily available. Most of them are old or discontinued or rare even. So yeah, and it takes, like I said, a lot of time, not just with the bodies and the detailing and all that stuff, but the actual chassis and the tiny little modifications inside, and, a lot of the in-house job, if you want to call it, the grinding and the filing and all that stuff, and using sometimes 3D printers to make, aftermarket brackets and parts to hold these things. But yeah, I definitely do sell them sometimes. And, I might be selling more of them, because it's actually, I've gotten to the point where I sometimes, I don't have much space anymore. So every time I take on a new project, I have to thin out, some other build, because every time I get rid of one, it basically opens up space for me to start working on a newer project, let's say. And yeah, that's the main reason why I do that. Sometimes, I list things on eBay, and I'm probably going to do that soon, I think for 1 or 2 builds, because I still have plenty of stuff that are just sitting in boxes, and I have the storage downstairs and the warehouse and all that stuff. So it's just sitting, and yeah, that's the main reason why I do that. So short answer is yes, I do sell these things, but it's not like I have just a regular shop, or I do this as a business. It's more of like a collector thing. If somebody is gonna appreciate something like this and purchase it, then they'd have to be willing to pay the price which I set, because it takes into account the time that I put into it, takes into account the parts that I had to buy, and just, the little modifications, including the actual price of the car itself. So, yeah, and it's hard to justify that for people that don't take this hobby too seriously. I know there's a lot of you out there that are like me, and you would do that, because I would do that. I'm the type of person that would do that. I've purchased collector cars from builders before, and I was very happy. Sometimes I was not, but let's say for the most part I was happy. And yeah, so I will, short answer again is I will be listing maybe 1 or 2 of these builds on eBay pretty soon, so keep a lookout. Maybe I'll post a link here on YouTube, because yeah, if it helps, sell 1 or 2 of them to thin out the collection, that always is good for me, because it gives me a chance to start working on a newer project or something else, And yeah, so I'll see you guys soon, and ciao. Hope you guys enjoyed the video.